The impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true.
And it is not a question of a little occultism or a touch of mysticism, Mr. Benton. It is vampires, and there's a host of damned souls at Pelham House.
I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night.
Here, the old gods aren't dead.
And what of the true god?
He's dead. Can't complain.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
You're listening to Paranormal UK Radio.
Hi everybody, this is Irene Allen, the host of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show of the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And with me is Mark Johnson.
Breathe now. You make sure you breathe.
Yes.
You say it all at once, and then you get so out of breath by the end.
Yeah, but did you see? I did, didn't I? I ran out of breath by that last word.
Well, because I think you started with only half of filled lungs, so you need to be all prepared. You should have this all written out in front of you, then you can just read it out.
You've been doing it for how many years?
I know. Can't.
Gosh.
You know what they say about old dogs?
Yeah, shut your face.
You
got your name right this time.
Yeah, I am impressed with that.
Marky, or something, I don't know what I said. Anyway, people, here we are back again. We've been away for a couple of weeks, haven't we, Mark?
Yeah, we missed last week. I mean, we've had some on and off due to scheduling issues. Plus, just it's been a really weird time this last month or so. So, but we have shows scheduled till the end of the year, up to the Christmas holidays. So. We're going to try to crank these out weekly and going into January. So
as long as I don't break my leg again.
Yeah, don't break your leg. We don't want to disappoint our 4 or 5 listeners.
Do you know something? I was quite disappointed. I never got an email or anybody say, "How's your leg? How's your ankle? I hear you've broken your ankle."
Nobody?
Nobody cares about me.
I thought you got some responses on Facebook.
Oh yeah, from my Facebook friends.
But no like family or real life friends. What about your sons?
Oh, they just said hop along, Mum. I walked on a broken ankle for a week before I went to the hospital, so they know what my pain threshold's like. So they don't really worry.
Mm.
As long as I'm not unconscious, they know I'm all right.
Well, keep breathing. Keep hopping along. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
Hey, I do have to ask before we get into the show tonight. Now that I know you had your grandchildren there for a couple of weeks, and now they've all gone back home, has the house literally quieted down yet? Or are you still dealing with some activity?
No, it did. It quietened down. It did quieten down for about a week. Oh, we had the usual things, getting up in the morning and the lights were turned on in certain rooms. And I'm one of these people that when I go upstairs, as I come out of a room and turn the light off, I always look for it underneath the door to make sure it is definitely off.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And when I go upstairs, I turn and look back down the hallway and check under the doors of every room to make sure the lights are off. We've been going into various rooms both me and Brian, been getting up in the morning, going into various rooms, and lights are on. A few things have happened, little things, nothing to worry about, I
think it was...
haven't heard anyone coming up the stairs or any... Oh, we've had doors banging, doors opening and shutting.
But it's less now that the children aren't there.
Yeah, a lot less.
Yeah. They definitely seem, with their energy, they seem to cause things to spike there.
Well, I'm in the house on my own at the moment because he's in London working. And last night I sat there and I listened to doors opening and shutting off of the hallway. And I've got one door that really squeaks and creaks when it opens. And that one was opening up last night.
Oh, the creepy door squeak.
Yes. And I'm not going to oil it either because I can always tell it's that downstairs toilet, downstairs ladies' powder room, as I call it, because it's got a notice on the outside, ladies' powder room. But I did get up and I went in there to check the window was shut just in case it was something to do with the window, but no, the window was shut tight. It's, it opens up quite often. But there you go, that's this house for you, isn't it? If it was quiet, then the house would be,
One of these days, if I ever get my butt across the pond, I'm going to have to come over and investigate it.
Yeah, you'll have cameras up everywhere. You will, won't you?
No, well, you know me. I've kind of backed off that. I'd have a few up, though. More audio, I think, than anything.
Oh, audio in this house is great.
Yeah.
You'd always pick up something, EVPs of some sort or another. I left a voice recorder, one of these ones that go on automatically when it hears a noise, up in one of the back bedrooms. And it was during the day. I left it up there for a couple of hours. When I took it downstairs to listen to it, about an hour into it, you heard this dragging sound as something was approaching it. But it wasn't like dragging on the floor. It was like, if you can think of someone that can only walk on one leg and has to drag the other one behind them, sort of thing. It was like that. And then there was this awful sound when it got up close to the actual machine.
Huh.
Yeah. I don't know who you are, mate, but you're not staying here for long.
Naff off.
Yeah, naff off.
Well, since we're talking about, all things haunted and paranormal, I think let's go ahead and introduce our guest. Now, our guest tonight is an author and paranormal investigator. Jack Cary has been a paranormal investigator and cryptozoologist for 25 years. He's the founder of Paranormal Intelligence Agency.com and is the current director of Crypto Four Corners. He's a regular guest on Ancient Civilizations, Deep Space, and Open Minds documentary series produced by Gaia. His latest book, which came out in 2019, Paranormal Planet. So, Jack, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Jack, can you imagine why I didn't do that intro? We would still be doing it by tomorrow morning.
Right. I understand, yeah.
But listen, Mark, this is the only man that we've had on this. Sorry about my other guests and everything, but the only man that we've had on recently that's given me this voice swoon.
It's that deep bass or baritone.
Can you sing, Jack?
No, unfortunately, I cannot sing or dance. That's why I became a paranormal investigator.
Well, come and investigate my house. Just all you have to do is talk, and I get the voice swoon, as I call it.
I don't usually get complimented on it, so I appreciate that very much. Might be the first time, actually.
Oh, is it? Okay.
There's a first time for everything, Jack.
I know.
So Jack, let's talk a little bit about your background. Now, you've been investigating for over 25 years, so I'll have to ask the obvious question. What got you into investigating, not only paranormal, but cryptozoology?
Well, that's actually a really good and that question it's all encompassing for me. So first of all, I was raised in an old antebellum mansion in southeastern Oklahoma. And this place was as haunted as it could be. So there were spirits that on a number of occasions would take my mother's dishes out of all of the cabinets and smash them into tiny little pieces all over the kitchen floor. And although this was a large house, you never hear a single sound. And it happened on 3 separate occasions. And she had to eventually put locks on all the cabinets. Constantly saw shadow people. Had what I would consider to be an alien UFO type of encounter in that area. And as a child growing up, most of the Bigfoot activity, Sasquatch activity occurring in the country was actually occurring very near my home. And even today, LaFleur County boasts more Bigfoot Sasquatch sightings than any of the 4 states altogether that surround it. So it's one of those areas where the southern mountains in Oklahoma go right into the Ozark Mountains, and it's just vast wilderness that goes on for thousands and thousands and thousands of acres.
Well, there's a lot of dense area like that around the country where things can hide. I've always been fascinated as a kid with Bigfoot and ghosts and the paranormal, but it took me moving from Los Angeles to here to New Jersey over 20 years ago and the house I lived in had some paranormal activity to really get me hooked and start investigating and form my own group, New Jersey Paranormal Research, for a while, and then I met Irene, and we've been doing working our own stuff off and on. And Irene was the founder of Spirit Rescue International, which lasted for how many years, Irene?
Oh, I don't know, Mark. You ask silly questions now. I've got no idea.
Yeah, I forgot. With your age, I know.
Long time.
The mind is the first thing to go. So
He keeps on about my age. He's not far behind me, I can tell you. But no, I honestly, it went on for years, and we worked all around the world. We had people from all different countries, doctors, nurses, as consultants, and one thing or another. So it was pretty good. And then I let it go.
Well, with that area of Oklahoma and the house that you lived in, how do you know how old the house was or when it was built?
I don't. I should have asked my mother before she passed, but it was built prior to the Civil War. And you have to remember back then, that area was still considered Indian territory. Mm-hmm. So it was mainly just Native American tribes. So who originally built that home, I'm not really sure, but it's in, the very southeastern corner of the state. So going into Arkansas and Louisiana and eastern Texas is all Ozarks and very, very heavily wooded areas. But so I'm not really sure who would have built that home there. But in the town that we lived in, it was probably the biggest house in this town, but it was a town of like 18,000 people,
Uh-huh. No, my father is also from Oklahoma. He was more of the very south central around Durant, the Durant area.
Oh, sure.
And then my mother's from West Virginia, so I like to say I'm half Okie and half Hoopy.
That's a good combination.
Yeah,
I'll go with that.
Now, Hoopy hopes.
now you've got a couple of different books out between your Paranormal Planet and Bigfoot Unleashed. You're dealing a lot with cryptozoology as well as paranormal. Do you prefer one over the other? Are they equally as interesting to you?
Well, I can tell you early on I was somewhat interested in doing ghost cases, but having my childhood experiences, ghosts for me even in my early career, did not constitute a real mystery. In other words, I know that they exist. And in my own mind, I ask myself, can I in some way make a difference in trying to figure out why they exist, which now I believe is the main question. And, you know, going over thousands of hours of footage from various ghost hunting teams, it becomes apparent that often the spirit will ask for help of some kind, but rarely is any help given, or is any help, you know, can you find a way to actually provide help to this person? And I think until some sort of new technology comes about where we can sort of get a glimpse into what the mechanism is actually behind trapping these souls in this dimension, is interesting. And, you know, a lot of people will say, well, they've got unfinished business, etc. But I think that that's just an assumption that we make because it makes us feel better that there could be a way for them to escape that by finishing the business, but no direct corroboratory evidence that that's what's taking place across the entire spectrum.
I agree with that. I think it's a oversimplification. Half the time when people try to explain, you get these ghost hunters and ghost groups. Oh, well, you know, they have unfinished business, or they don't know they've died, or whatever. But yeah, they're jumping to conclusions because they don't know. And unless you're dealing with a very reputable psychic, and I underline the reputable part of it, because they're very few and far between, that someone who can tune in to see what it is, you know, what the state of mind is like for the person. But then there are also so many different other types of activity too that get lumped in. People say it's a haunting. And Irene and I have talked about this on many occasions, that we may be dealing with other types of phenomenon. People are mistaking it for a haunting, such as, you know, anything from a time slip, interdimensional types of activity. I've mentioned cases that I've worked on here where it's something to do with the land, and it's not a human spirit. There's something else intelligent on the land that either mimics or, you think it's a human, but it's not. So you have to really do your due diligence to figure out what it is that you're dealing with from the very beginning. Absolutely. And, you know, a lot to do a really deep investigation, especially when you're doing one where spirits are involved. It requires a lot of rigorous research, you know, into actually figuring out the history of the place, if you can find any clue as to what is going on, and maybe corroborate that evidence with some psychic testimony without them ever seeing it. Might lead you in an interesting direction. But clearly, like you say, there are places where the land just seems bad. And like here in the U.S., the Skinwalker Ranch, for the paranormal people out there that know all about the Skinwalker Ranch, and the fact that it's the entire Uinta Basin of Utah that has this paranormal activity taking place. And it was because of the paranormal activity going on there that the Navajo tribal people named it the Skinwalker area, because skinwalkers to them are the most paranormal thing, even though they're a type of witch within their own society. Yeah, that's something I've noticed, speaking of skinwalkers, that paranormal teams, even Ghost Adventures, had done some investigations into skinwalkers on the Navajo reservation, and people seem to get their terminology mixed up and think that the skinwalker itself is just a separate creature, which I've always understood it to be, not that I'm an expert by any means, but I've always understood it to be a evil shaman or witch that it can shapeshift. And that's the whole term skinwalker, because they're able to change their skin and change their shape.
Well, absolutely. And I can say that you're lucky in that me and J.C. Johnson did an immense amount of work among the Navajo people and all through northern New Mexico into southern Colorado on their reservation lands, because of the amount of activity, other types of paranormal activity as well, that happens there. And JC had actually married into the tribe at some point, so he had a close relationship with the the people that run the different tribal councils. And so we got access to a lot of these areas to go investigate. It was, it's like winning the lottery as a paranormal investigator, because not many people are granted access to do this. But I can tell you that you're completely right. There is a big mix-up in understanding as to what a skinwalker really is. And in the Navajo civilization, society, ancient traditions, the skinwalker is actually an evil witch, and there are covens of these evil witch, and covens of them. And so and the Navajo word is Naagladoshi. So, and if you even say that word in the presence of any Navajo that you're not very, very close to, on a personal level, it will get you completely banned. That's how seriously that they take it. That even if you mention the word, it will bring them around, right? But the skinwalker witch is required to do a very, very evil act of actually committing the murder of a family member. And the younger, the better. And when they do, this is actually witnessed by and recorded these days by the rest of this witch coven, and it's held over that person so that it can never, ever leave. Once you sign that dotted line, you're never leaving, right? And so they can maintain absolute secrecy about their activities. The thing about these witches is that they're so extremely powerful that other types of occult groups are jealous of their power, right? And trying to even figure out how it is they're able to do what they do. So they apparently hold the knowledge through which a human being can actually alter themselves to the point of biologically turning into another species of animal. And it can be pretty much any species of animal. I have two of the only known authenticated photographs of real skinwalker witches. And one of them, it's very interesting because he's obvious in some kind of training thing where he is using all of these plants to appear like a tree, and he looks just like a tree. So you're talking about people that are mixing together like these ancient arts of camouflage with this really dark witchcraft, and allows them these amazing abilities. So yeah, and most people don't realize that. The other thing about the skinwalker witches is that they have the knowledge of how to create what we call corpse powder.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's not unlike the toxin that Wade Davis went to find in Haiti, that they make, do their zombification type stuff out of. It's a nerve agent like that, and they take parts out of Anasazi graves that they know about, and that's why they call it corpse powder, and that's mixed with another concoction. And if you become too close to knowing what they're doing, if you become a problem, etc., they will simply come by at some point and lightly dust your door handle or the handle on your home or whatever. And you just simply touch that it's a neurotoxin, and immediate illness takes place. And we actually witnessed it on two separate occasions. So it's one of those things where we would get called in on a case of a skinwalker being around, and we would go out there, and clearly the people were just frightened to death. We would find some form of trace evidence being left, and to us, it was a real phenomenon that was taking place there.
Is there a cure for that?
What's that?
Is there a cure for it, Jack?
Not that I don't know. Cure for the neurotoxin we dosed on. I do know that the last gentleman who got it went through 2 years of just an amazing amount of damage to his nerve system before he finally succumbed to it.
Wow.
And, it wasn't until, they were cleaning out his belongings, and they also found what they call a Navajo witch bundle had been hidden in his home as well. So it's very interesting that he was, targeted that way. And so within their society, it's completely taboo. They're scared of them and don't want them around, yet there's no way to get rid of them. And they've been part of their society for, who knows how long, 1,000 years or more.
Well, if I've learned one new thing tonight, it's that there are covens. It almost sounds like,
I didn't know that.
Like the pagan witchcraft, or in the UK witches covens. I didn't realize that the Navajo or the other tribes who you have these evil shamans, these witches, that they had covens and worked together. For some reason, I always had the impression that they worked solitary, but I know.
And that's very interesting you bring that up, because in most of the cases that we were documenting, there were 2 to 3 at a time. So you were seeing them work in these groups. And it's interesting that most people don't know that they have these, evil witch covens that have lasted for a really long time. And wherever they got the knowledge that they possess, it's a very real, potent knowledge of what they're making. I don't know if it's some sort of concoction they're making combined with psychic techniques or whatever to make these people literally transform into something. Now, we did have a few cases where we began to ask the question, is this a group of witches that have grown their psychic abilities to the point that they're able to project this imagery into the mind of the person that they're trying to affect? Or are they really biologically transforming into this other figure? And that's something I still don't quite know yet. So
I think reality is so much more stranger than we understand in Western thought. I don't dismiss the fact that there possibly could physically shapeshift, especially if you start to consider other cryptids, which I definitely want to talk about a little bit later in the program, that seem to have shape-shifting abilities or even interdimensional characteristics where they can come in and out of our reality. So if you take I'm trying to find the right words here. If you start looking at things from a quantum mechanic level, from a really higher energy, spiritual level, there are things that would seem impossible to us normally that could be within reach if you have the right knowledge, tools, and psychic abilities.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you look at quantum mechanics and the fact alone that a particle will act differently when it's observed than when it's not observed literally means that our observation alters reality itself. Observation alters the outcome of anything that the observation's being placed on. And that mechanism alone, anywhere in our reality, just makes a huge number of things possible.
Well, and I know that the whole Skinwalker phenomenon is very, very steeped in Navajo culture. I think also in Hopi culture, maybe even the Ute culture. Around that whole section of the country. But you don't hear so much of it being involved with other Native American tribes in other areas, say like further up north with the Sioux or the Crow or the other types, or even going up into Canada or even the West Coast. I mean the East Coast Indian tribes. You never really hear of evil that type of evil witch or shamans. Have you heard much of that, or is it because it seems very localized within that one southwestern section of the country?
Yeah, very much so. That it would, any of those Pueblo Indian tribes got the knowledge of the Skinwalkers from the Navajo. That's ground zero for where that whole belief system came from. The only other Native American tribe that I know of that has something similar to that, but it's not like a witch and it's not in a coven, but it's a shape-shifting type of animal, is on the north and western coast of the U.S., and they call this thing the Kushtaka, or the Otter Man. And so you kind of see this thing. It's an interesting that it possesses this, lore that this creature can change from an otter to a man, shape-shifting. And then you have the southwestern Indians with this whole tradition of using abilities to shapeshift. So
I know this is a daft question, but if there's a human link to it, is that classed as crypto?
That's a very, very good question, just because of them shifting into different kinds of animals. Yeah. That's one of those areas of cryptozoology that really spans the gulf between paranormal and not paranormal. And by that, I mean, there's a whole class of cryptozoological animals. Yeah. And these are all bipedal cryptozoological animals that fall within a paranormal realm. And then you have new emerging species that nobody's aware of yet, like the South Texas chupacabra, not to be mistaken with the earlier sightings. The new canine species, that's an emergent species that would fall into the realm of cryptozoology. And then you have what they call Lazarus species, like the thylacine or the Tasmanian tiger, who many believe is still around. Here in North America, me and J.C. Johnson both really, really came to believe that the dire wolf was still alive and operational. And that is, that's a gigantic cryptozoological find, if you can find any of that, but it's not necessarily paranormal. And that's why I developed my unified field theory of paranormal activity to be able to classify these things.
Well, I remember in the book, The Hunt for the Skinwalker, talking about the Skinwalker Ranch there in the Utah Basin, that one of the very first stories in that book was the Gorman family moving in and on the very first day and having this wolf-like creature approach them, come right up to them, and it was huge, would come up to their chests. It was giant. And by the descriptions, sounded like it could have been a dire wolf or something very similar to it. Although, if I'm sure you're familiar with the story, that when it grabbed one of their calves and tried to pull it through the fence, and they kicked it, beat at it, then finally shot it several times with high-powered rifles, and the thing barely even flinched, and they tracked it for a while, and then it vanished. So there was a slight paranormal aspect to it. But the description of the animal itself seemed to fit that dire wolf description.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. And, what you have with the Skinwalker Ranch area in the Uinta Basin is what, we describe in the U.S. as a vortex area, or an area where basically you have a wide array of paranormal activity, different kinds of phenomenon, all taking place within a relatively small geographic area. And we refer to that as a vortex area simply because it's believed that there's some sort of interdimensional activity taking place there to explain the wide array of activity. And that's part of the theory that I developed, was that there are, in fact, areas around the U.S. and around the world that all copy one another. There's various, like Sedona, Arizona here, and then the San Luis Valley in south central Colorado, both of which I investigated for a long time. You have UFO activity, you have Bigfoot activity, dogman activity, alien abduction, poltergeist activity, and it's all occurring within like a 10 square mile area. You know what I mean? And everybody's...
It sounds
right.
like my valley.
Right. And so everybody's like, seems completely credible. Nobody's trying to hoax or anything. It's not like they're getting kind of paid off to let you know of some activity. And so there's places like that around. And what I discovered was that there was a mechanism that we can find within science to back up the idea that in each one of these areas, you're getting intermittent interdimensional activity taking place. And to make a long scientific story short, my unified field theory of paranormal activity stipulates that 1/2 of all paranormal activity is interdimensional in nature. And it occurs on the planet here where you have high quartz crystal deposits in the underlying strata of the Earth. Mm-hmm. And as this is crazy because I'm a big science buff, and I came across this science work of a scientist who built this thing called a Mach effect thruster. I kind of have to presage the whole thing with this. And he came up or found out that when a body of matter travels through space, there's these minute fluctuations that occur. And he found a way to harness the energy coming off those fluctuations and create basically a 0-point propulsion system. And he calls it the Mach effect thruster. It's also known as the Woodward effect for anybody out there that wants, to look into the details of it. But it occurred to me, what you have with the Earth is a body of matter. It's traveling through space. It has to also exhibit minute fluctuations. And we know that when you compress quartz crystals together, they become ionized. And when they become ionized, they produce hugely strong electromagnetic fields. Our best physicists around the world are telling us that not only are there other dimensions, but the only thing separating those other dimensions from us, they literally call it an electromagnetic membrane. And so my theory is that these vortex areas, and you can look at the, quartz crystal deposit maps, you can see that each one of these areas has vast amounts of it. When the quartz crystal becomes ionized, it creates these fields like in Sedona that are 500 times stronger than the surrounding countryside. So strong that it's literally able to rip or tear that membrane separating our dimension from another for a unspecified amount of time. It's intermittent. And that activity we describe as paranormal. The membrane, heals itself after a little bit, and the activity ends until the whole mechanism trips again. And that's why I called my book Paranormal Planet. It could very well be that we live on the only planet anywhere that has a natural mechanism by which doorways to other dimensions just pop open.
And there are locations listed all over the world in different countries that have these hot spots, as Irene mentioned, where she's currently living in her valley, is one of those hot spots. She has everything from ghosts to UFOs to even what we call the Trey Moore, the Welsh Bigfoot. So, So the Southwest, though, really seems to be a big hot spot. Now, I wanted to ask your opinion on, we talk about the Skinwalker Ranch and the Uinta Basin, which a lot of people have heard of. That's one of the more famous locations. Have you watched the History Channel show, Secrets of the Skinwalker Ranch? And if so, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, that's where that team's going out there, isn't it? I saw a couple of those episodes.
Yeah, but, it's very interesting to me because if you read Hunt for the Skinwalker, at the end of it, the NIDS, or National Institute for Discovery Science, that Robert Bigelow got together, that team of scientists, to go to the ranch and study this, they determined that they were interacting with a non-human intelligence. It says it right there. And so you now have Robert Bigelow passing this ranch on to yet another Las Vegas real estate mogul, right? And they start this big TV show. And just in the last season or two, he's notified, Brendan Fugel's notified that by the NASA scientists that is part of their team, that he had been contacted by an intelligence agency, right? They're allowing him to say this on camera, a national, hugely popular show, that he had been contacted by an intelligence agency and that they were monitoring their actions on that ranch. Now, tell me that isn't a staged...
well, I've never known any intelligence agency that would do that.
Right. It's a totally staged way of bringing the Skinwalker Ranch into the overall UFO disclosure conversation taking place. And then what happens in the very next episode? A white unmarked helicopter comes flying around, and the only people that are allowed to fly unmarked helicopters on the United States grounds is an intelligence agency, usually CIA.
Right.
So you're just like, so obviously this is a way of getting people to say, hey, there must be something to this if an intelligence agency is interested in it. It's another hook.
Yeah. I mean, television, you always got to take television shows with a huge grain of salt, having worked on a few myself and been burned by them. I will say, though, that for the most part, I'm very impressed with this show because they do seem to be trying to take a very scientific approach to discovering what's going on to the ranch, with the different readings that they're doing, the different experiments that they're trying. Sometimes there's a little too much drama with Dragon freaking out. You can't dig here, just like, come on, give me a break. But the real fact that they've recorded high spikes of gamma radiation to the point where, what's his name, Travis, I forget his last name, the one astrophysicist actually had radiation burns on his face and hands. And some of the experiments that they were running, shooting off the rockets and finding out like the basin seems to be focusing energy at a spot about a mile above the ranch. And, the one thing everybody always said, well, why don't you fly a helicopter or something up there? But the reason that they came out and said that previously that they wouldn't do it made perfect sense, since electronics seem to malfunction all the time. Do you really want a helicopter going up there and having an electronic failure and come crashing to Earth? Now,
well, I tell you, I watched it for a couple of episodes, just a couple. I lost interest.
Yeah, but I'm personally interested in it. I like the approach. Again, you got to take it with everything with a grain of salt. Everything with a grain of salt. I won't stake my life on it, but I like some of the things that I'm seeing now. I know they're filming a third season and they're coming out. Now the thing with Bigelow, though, too, is I don't know what your thoughts are on Bigelow. I personally don't hold him very high regard for a couple of reasons. First of all, he's very much in bed with the federal government and even the intelligence agencies. The fact that he had the ranch for 25 years and kept most of his findings to himself, except for Colm Kelleher coming out with George Knapp to write that book. But the stories and things that they found were mostly kept to himself. And he was researching it for his own reasons. And I know he's also tried to buy other ranches. I don't know if you're familiar with the Stardust Ranch outside of Phoenix. That's been having a lot of activity. With John Edmonds. John has claimed that Bigelow has tried to buy his ranch on several occasions, but John also claims he's lowballed him so much he's always told him, to stuff it. But
Right.
That's like another area that seems to be a very big hot spot of activity in that Rainbow Valley area of Arizona.
It does. And, Bigelow is an interesting multi-layered character, in my opinion. So as a child, his grandparents had a very traumatic UFO encounter. And they relayed the weight of that upon him through his childhood. And he always told himself, if I ever get the money, I'm going to start a group that investigates this phenomenon. We're going to get to the bottom of it. And it was around that same time, when he bought the Skinwalker Ranch from the Shermans and assembled this team and everything, that he also started Bigelow Aerospace. And we know now that Bigelow Aerospace was the inheritors of many black budget contracts, so some of which appear to have to do with UFO technology. And so I think he very much has this dual side to him of maybe thinking, well, if I'm okay with doing black budget work for the government as long as we get to the truth of what's happening. You know what I mean? And what's interesting about all that is that if you can Google the Lara Logan 60 Minutes report with Bob Bigelow, and she asked him outright, just straight to his face on camera. So do you believe the aliens are here on Earth? And he says, yes, they're right below people's noses. And she goes, don't you think people will think you're crazy? And he says, I don't give a damn. And that's an exact quote from that interview. You know what I mean? So he's told the public this is all real, but it's just like UFO disclosure that's happening right now with the Pentagon and all the F-18 videos being released and the videos from the Omaha and the Nimitz, etc. Is that the public still aren't talking about it in their daily conversations. And right now it should be the only thing that they should be talking about.
But to see the media itself, even though the media, which in the past always would do, if they did a UFO report, would do it tongue-in-cheek with what my friend Bruce used to call the snicker factor, or play X-Files music, and they always did something to cheapen it and laugh behind, or give each other knowing looks like, oh yeah, this is all crap. Now, lately, it's coming out more with NBC News. Tucker Carlson's done a couple of segments on it. It's more in the mainstream, and yet it's still not being talked about or being taken seriously enough by the media, which seems to be distracted by too many other stupid things that are going on. And you would think this would be the number one story of the century, and it's being just, sure, the Pentagon has released a few videos and that are credible. It's everyone, the media's looked at it and said, yes, these are credible. Okay, now let's talk about COVID. Let's talk about politics. Let's talk about other things to scare the crap out of you. And then they forget about it. And the public really doesn't get the story. I know for years, people like Richard Dolan and Steve Bassett and Peter Robbins and all of these researchers are always pushing for disclosure. Well, we're never going to get the kind of disclosure that they want. I think what we're getting right now is as much disclosure as we're ever going to get. They're going to release a few things, seems a little bit credible, and then they distract us with something else that's shiny, it's out there. And so the public never really grasps onto it, except for the hardcore UFO enthusiasts. So I don't know. That's just my personal opinion on it.
Can I say a couple of things?
Absolutely.
I'm not getting a word in here tonight with you two are really going at it. I've forgotten what I was going to say now. Oh, yes. For Mr. Bigelow, this is a message. He can buy my house to help. Okay? Because it's all happening around here. And if he wants to investigate, he just has to buy the house off me for a couple of £1 million. Anyway, Jack, do you believe that aliens do walk amongst us?
I do, and I've even produced a video to that end on my YouTube channel, which is Paranormal Intelligence Agency. You should be able to find it easily. And there's a video on there called They Walk Among Us, the Alien Hybrid Threat. And I have followed for longer than I've actually been investigating the work of many abduction investigators, everybody from Bud Hopkins to Dr. Johnny Mack, who was head of the Harvard School of Psychology and wrote a Pulitzer Prize winning book called Abduction.
Very familiar with Dr. Mack, yes.
Yeah, and Dr. David M. Jacobs. These are guys who, in my opinion, have a body of evidence that, especially Jacobs, in my opinion, the last amount of work, but a large body of evidence, in my opinion, that there was or is a genetic program going on, that the goal of that genetic program was to create hybrid aliens that look like us, and share some of this alien DNA. Apparently, in my research, it took 8 generations till they were successful. And if you do your research, the last couple of years, the alien abduction phenomenon has just radically decreased almost to nothing. And they told us for decades, the abductees came back telling us that that was going to happen, that this was a limited time program, that they were going to achieve some goal. And now it appears that they have. And Dr. Jacobs believed that the end goal was to implant these hybrids into our society. The one question that is never answered by the aliens, no matter how many times it was asked, and it was asked numerous times if you go through all of the testimony of these abductees, was why. They never answer the question why. And you would think, if one of these abductees was making up their encounter, don't you think one of them would come back and say, oh, yeah, they told me why. It was such and such and such and such, No, not one of them. Every one of them that asked the question of why were told that they would not be told the answer. So, isn't that crazy?
Sorry, Mark.
No, go ahead.
Do you think that these aliens, when they're walking amongst us, to keep themselves under wraps so that nobody knows that they are hybrids or alien in any way?
Oh, absolutely.
Do you think that they lower their intelligence?
No, I think according to the abductee testimony and all of the work that Dr. Jacobs did, these new hybrids, they look just like us, but they're neurologically superior to us in that they can.
But they can lower their intelligence to fit in with the normal everyday person. But when they want, or when it's necessary, their intelligence goes sky high.
Well, would they need to lower their intelligence or just pretend like, again, if you're acting human, you just pretend you're acting human. You don't have to lower your intelligence. You just keep it hidden.
No, if you're highly intelligent, if you're highly intelligent, more so than a genius that we have in a normal society, okay, then if they lower the intelligence to go onto the level of man, then they're going to be undetected more than what they would be if they were using this high intelligence that they've really got. Capito?
We'll see. I got you fooled.
To talk down to humans, sure. Yeah, the other aliens, the Greys could do that as well. The thing I think is interesting is that they make it clear that these new hybrids can control other humans. Control their thoughts, their emotions, and therefore their actions, but only within a given distance. Isn't that interesting? And so they're implanting them who knows what it is geographically, or who knows what the end game plan is in this control mechanism that they're able to exert. But in the entire abduction phenomenon, you have this power being exhibited. The Greys seem to exhibit it, have the ability to seize an abductee's mind. They lean right over the abductee's eyes and glance, stare right into them. And it is believed that they're able to actually seize the optic nerve and overlay imagery that is the false memory taking place over the abduction. It was stated a number of times to abductees that by the aliens that they did not expect the problem with human emotion, that human emotion was an unforeseen problem for them in this program, and that it was allowing the abductees to actually remember what occurred to them. It's because of our emotions that these bleed through memories were taking place. And they, and they didn't want that, but they felt like this program had to happen for whatever their motive is.
There are a lot of, and again, we won't focus all on UFOs and aliens tonight, because there's so much good stuff to talk about. But, I've read Dr. Mack's, both of his books. I've read Dr. Jacobs' books. I've had long conversations with Richard Dolan and Peter Robbins and all of these investigators. But I've also had the opportunity to interview and talk with a lot of the actual experiencers. And it seems sometimes that, yes, when you're dealing with the abductees and genetic materials taken, there is a hybrid program going on, but there seems to be something more than that. It's more than just creating a hybrid race. They seem to be involved with us on much higher levels at times that we don't fully comprehend. We've had the opportunity to talk with Whitley Strieber on several occasions, and I've read his books from the very beginning, and then I've seen how things have evolved over the years. And when we've last talked to him these last few times, the whole phenomenon itself has taken on a new dimension where he's not being abducted, but he's having these interactions. And other abductees or experiencers, we should say, are having these other interactions that seem to be taking place on a higher dimensional level, even a spiritual level.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've not read anything about that, other than I knew he was kind of having those experiences, but I've not seen if that's carrying over widely into the rest of the abductees that, have suffered through the years or not. I just don't know.
Now I'm looking at your YouTube page, and I could see the video I'm going to look at later, the Walking Among Us, the Alien Hybrid Threat. And the still image that is the thumbnail for this is, I recognize it as being from Stan Romanek, and supposedly from one of his conferences where this girl who was sitting in the audience, who has very strange features, especially her eyes. Now, I'm curious what your thoughts are, because I know there's a lot of controversy about Stan after everything that happened the last few years. What's your thoughts on? Do you feel that he was hoaxing, or do you feel that, it was legitimate? What are your thoughts?
Well, my sources, which I cannot name, I investigated this for a very long time. I'm told by some sources that I trust, that I find highly credible, that the photograph was probably the only thing that he had that was real. How he came by that photograph is something of speculation, really, but these people believe that that photograph had actually been taken by somebody else at a location completely different than anything he was claiming. He somehow got his hands on it and then claimed it was from his experience. That's what I was told. I don't know, when it comes right down to it, can you say that's the absolute truth? Who knows? But in the end, the girl in that photograph is an exact 100% perfect likeness of what countless abductees have described. So, if nothing else, it gives us a very accurate visual of what a hybrid looks like. Now they don't even look like that. Apparently they look completely human, and she is slightly off.
Yes, definitely with the eyes. You could see how they're slanted. Even though her eyes look closed, you could see the lid itself was very slanted backwards. Right. We've talked so much on the UFOs. Actually, before we switch gears, Irene, do you have any other questions on that subject? Irene? Oh, she must have popped off.
No, I'm here. I was muting because I had a grape in my mouth.
I figured you were eating grapes.
No, I find it absolutely amazing. And I'm learning quite a lot of stuff that, connects, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Well, you know what I mean, Mark.
I do. Nobody else does, but I do. Well, let's switch over to some cryptozoology, because you have done a lot of work, especially working with JC, which we mentioned to you before we started the show that we interviewed JC many years ago. Great guy. Real sad that he had passed, and. There are, the most famous cryptid that people think of, the average person will think of, is, Bigfoot. And you have researchers out there like an older friend of mine, Tim Stover. He runs Ohio Bigfoot Hunters. He had a Bigfoot encounter over 25 years ago, and while he was hunting, he's been looking for it ever since. Now, he's convinced it's just an undiscovered great hominid, a regular natural animal, or possibly even a missing link type of creature. Other people believe that there are interdimensional qualities, or there are stories that they are involved with, even with the UFO phenomenon. Just talking about Bigfoot alone, because there's a couple of others that I want to get into that are even wilder. What are your thoughts on that? Do you feel that it's an undiscovered primate species, or do you feel that it's something different?
Yes, I pick other, and I'll tell you why. So in Paranormal Planet and in my unified field theory, it stipulates that any and all bipedal cryptozoological animals are in fact chimera constructions from the ET presence. The very first descriptions of Bigfoot actually go back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is in the Sumerian tablets, with a creature called Enkidu.
Yep.
And Enkidu is described in those tablets as being 2/3 deity and 1/3 human. Now, when we collected DNA, me and JC and Robert Kreider and Dr. Christopher Dyer from the University of New Mexico actually went with us on one of these DNA collections. Some of that went into the Sasquatch Genome Project, which is published online and was this big controversy when it came out. A couple of them were just studied privately. And I can tell you from firsthand, having been there behind the scenes with all of these people, the geneticists, us actually finding the DNA, right there on the scene with eyewitnesses to it being left, is that this DNA, when they really took a look at it, the mitochondrial keeps coming up as Homo sapien. So the female lineage comes up as modern human. The paternal or Y DNA keeps coming up as unknown in the World Genetic Bank, but most closely resembling a primate. Now, when they really looked at the strands of this unknown primate, they were able to determine that there were fused sequences of genes that looked like they had come from other species. And that's called chimera work. And it's interesting. This is something that I write completely elaborate on in Bigfoot Unleashed, is the evidence for this chimera theory, which is a mountain of evidence. And I take everything from the Sumerian tablets all the way up to the DNA that we found and beyond, even ancient indigenous oral histories telling us that these creatures were related to, connected to the so-called star people. And so that's what my entire book explores. And here's the thing, is that this year, there was a team of scientists from all around the world, China, US, I believe UK, and parts of Europe, that were able to successfully fuse human and chimpanzee DNA together into chimera constructions, into actual living, living cells and everything. And they allowed them to actually live for 17 days. So if you do a search engine right now and look up monkey human chimera work, you'll come up with all of the different scientific papers. They actually killed the experiment because of moral reasons. But I bring it up because you're seeing on a very rudimentary scale that humans can even perfectly fuse DNA between two different species. And I think what you're seeing with the Bigfoot species is what many others think. This is a human hybrid, yes, but it's also a construction. And the only way it can be a chimera construction is if it was done by something much, much more advanced than what we are. And obviously, because of the history of these creatures, there's no way that we, somehow did it. And that leaves you very little possibilities. And when you're already, examining the fact that there is an alien presence on this planet and it goes back that far, and you have the Anunnaki and the Sumerian tablets doing all of this genetic work, it says, and then Enkidu appears and he's described as being 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. It's not hard to put two and two together and say, it looks like the Anunnaki, we weren't their only genetic experiment. There were others going on, and it's very likely that the Bigfoot species, which is reported on every continent, which is biologically impossible, had to have been a genetic manipulation that is able to actually live on every continent simultaneously. And by the way, it's their DNA that gives them such an edge over us that allows them to remain undiscovered. I mean, this is a creature that has a human-like intelligence, but superhuman abilities. And when you're out there in the field, it's not the size, you see one, and I have, it's not the size that really scares you, it's the speed. And you're talking about blinding speed. We estimated 65, 70 miles per hour cheetah speed over uneven mountainous terrain. We think the creature can see an infrared light based on the fact that the geneticists told us that there were sequences that look like it may have come from antelope and reindeer, and that both those species can see an infrared light. You have 200,000 game cams sold every year in this country, most of them to Bigfoot hunters, yet not one camera has been able to capture that perfect photograph, and that's because these creatures can see the light of the cameras. You're talking about a creature that can smell you from 2 miles away, can hear you from 2 miles away, can see you from 2 miles away. A creature like that, and it utilizes natural cave systems and all of the different abandoned mines, etc., can and does remain hidden in the wilds of North America anyway. But it's the only place I've done crypto work.
Well, I've also heard stories with Bigfoot being able to. One of the abilities is to mask itself, and even you have a couple of videos on your page about like an invisible predator-like beings. And this is a story Irene and I have told a few times because she's, we talk about the Welsh Bigfoot, the Trey Moore as they call it. And there's such...
This is also a story that was taken and adapted for this person's own. Somebody that we all mutually know.
Yeah, that person, that shall not be named. But, Irene has had a couple of experiences with something in her own backyard with two creatures that were cloaked, that looked, the outline shapes were very Bigfoot-like.
But that was 2 or 3 years apart from seeing the first one to the second one. And the second one, I'm sure, was the same as the first one, but only taller. It was the same.
It was older.
Same creature.
Older.
As if it had grown.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I can tell you the footage I have in that invisible predator in the woods video actually came from an investigator named. Let me think of his name here for a second. It just slipped my mind. Because I was thinking of Bob Woodward. But anyway, this gentleman was 3 miles deep. Bob Garrett, that's his name. And he was a good friend of JC's, by the way. They did some Sasquatch, investigation work together. And he was out in his investigation area. He was 3 miles deep. And when he all of a sudden began to notice what you're describing, that sort of shimmering, you can see the outline of a creature. Yeah. It looks like the creature on the movie Predator. Let's be honest about it, And he gets video footage. And so I have that video footage. Now, the interesting thing is that later on, Bob Garrett put that footage out, and it was later seized by the Department of Homeland Security. All of his stuff seized, and we lost all communication with him. We don't know why that is. Maybe we were looking at some kind of military hardware. Maybe we were, maybe they were just didn't want it out there. Who knows? But I've not had any problems. And I show instances where 2 other investigators also filmed exactly the same kind of creature. Now, this gets interesting because one of the main witnesses that's actually talked about in the missing 411 mystery is a woman named Jan Mcabee, and she's the wife of Dr. Bruce Mcabee, who is a famous UFO investigator. He's an optic scientist, and if you watch a lot of UFO documentaries, you've seen Dr. Bruce Mcabee on there analyzing UFO film. She goes out on their property, and it's a 10-acre property that abuts some wilderness area, and she's in her tree stand, and all of a sudden she sees movement, and it's one of these creatures. She can see it moving through the trees, the shimmering, the whole thing, until it stands still, and she's able to take her phone out and try to get a photograph of what she's seeing. And when I found that out, it immediately hit me that what are the odds? What's the probability that the wife of a very prominent and well-known ufologist experiences one of these creatures on their property and it not have some ET relationship? I think that's a very low probability in my estimation. And so because of that, I'm going with that these creatures are probably have a major ET connection. And it may not necessarily be, Bigfoot or Sasquatch either. I can tell you that we did a very deep hair morphology study, and other groups have too out there. And they did find that the Bigfoot hair is lacking what they call a medulla, which is that spongy center, that humans have. And that center shaft, it's filled with this highly reflective oil, is the only way to describe it. And when one of these creatures steps into the foliage, that reflective oil literally absorbs the light rays of the foliage around it and refracts it out. It's kind of like nature's perfect camouflage, and there are some others, like a polar bear has something similar to that, makes them take advantage of their surroundings. But a lot of people think, I'm under the impression that it's this ability that makes people think that they're cloaking. and perhaps going into another dimension, even though half of my theory is that half of paranormal activity is interdimensional. I don't believe that this creature falls under that category. I think it falls under the category of interaction with an ET species.
Well, can I tell you my story? See if
Absolutely.
this connects anywhere. Right. This particular night, I let the dogs out in the garden. This is the first time I saw it, Mark. I let the dogs out in the garden. The dogs come running back in, ran off into the kitchen, and I was just about to close the door to the garden, and it's quite a large garden, when I saw this thing approaching me. It was about 10 foot away at the time I saw it. I got the first glimpse of it, and it was I'm 5'6", well, 5'5.5", 3/4 actually, 5'5 3/4, and it came up to about just above my chest, and it kept coming closer and closer, and I knew it was something that I'd never seen before, and of course, obviously, defense mechanism kicked in. I stuck my palm of my hand up to and said in certain words something that meant "don't go there," if you understand what I mean. But it didn't turn around. It went backwards. It went backwards and then just vanished. A few years later, I was letting the dogs out in the garden again, and the dogs were right at the bottom of the garden, and I saw another one come close to me. It was very, very close, and it was a lot taller than I was. But somehow, I wasn't scared of it this time. It didn't frighten me. It's as if I kind of knew it, if you understand what I mean. And it was there for some time. Then the dogs came up from the garden. They got to the end of the patio, which is about 40 foot away. And they just stopped dead in their tracks, started growling and wouldn't come any closer. All their heckles went up. And these were two big German shepherds. And their heckles went up and they wouldn't come any closer. And this thing was still in front of me. And then it just kind of disappeared. The dogs come running across the patio, straight in the door, straight into the house. I came in the house, but I had this feeling that I'd been downloaded with some sort of information that I cannot remember.
That's amazing. It really
And
is.
I've always said that.
Yeah, it might be a very big clue in the overall phenomenon as to what's going on there.
I know it connected with me. I know some sort of conversation in my mind went on with this thing, but as soon as I stepped back over the threshold into the house, that memory was gone. All I know is that it kind of spoke to me.
That's where
I always put it down. I always put it down to the information will come back when it's needed.
Or you can always try hypnosis.
Well, I could do. Yeah.
But yeah, we remember what happened the last time we tried hypnosis with you.
Shut up.
Jack won't get it, but let's just say that it wasn't pretty. It was an experience. Let's put it that way. Another, Bigfoot itself again is the most famous one, but the other one that's really grown in popularity and in mainstream culture more these days, and I'm going to be honest with you, it's the one I really struggle with, is the whole dogman phenomenon. I hadn't heard about it except the last few years, and I don't know why. I struggle with it. I believe, and I've dealt with all different types of entities and beings and creatures and whatnot, but that's the only one I'm having trouble wrapping my head around. And I wonder what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, so I mean investigating dogman cases is partly what led me to the idea in my theory that all bipedal crypto animals have to be an ET genetic construction. And here's one that perfectly fits the bill. And what's interesting is if you take, let's say you are just reading the details about Bigfoot next to the details about Dogman, other than the descriptions of the animals, you have a long-running indigenous oral history of the creatures. You have a very long, back into the past, and ever-increasing number of highly credible eyewitnesses. And you have physical trace evidence being left at the scene. Now, that's interesting because you have two crypto animals that have exactly the same parallels, and neither one of them should exist in this biosphere.
Do you think Dogman could be a version of a werewolf?
No, I think werewolves fall under the idea of shape-shifting. There apparently is some sort of, genetic ability that ran through certain European lineages where these people were exhibiting these properties, but I don't think that the werewolf is related to Dogman. In fact, one of the primary investigator for, say, modern day Bigfoot or Dogman sightings is a woman named Linda Godfrey, and she's done an immense amount of research and about the Beast of Bray Road. Well, she was contacted by a man that she claims she was able to actually verify his credentials. He claimed to be a government-trained remote viewer, and he told her that they had targeted these creatures. And what he had to tell her was really interesting on a number of levels. So he told her that these were created by an ET species, that they had some sort of bio armor, which is interesting because all of our Dogman witnesses have fired on these things and they didn't seem to have an effect, like we were talking about with the Skinwalker Ranch. And he also claimed that right now they were somehow living down in the, crevices of the world, the cave systems and stuff like that. And either we're just left here stranded or they're waiting for something. I found that interesting. I don't know if he's right or not, but I do know that he mentions in his testimony that there's a bioluminescence to their fur. And I find that fascinating because she wrote those words in her book years and years ago. And the best photographic evidence I know of two separate Dogmen, it looks like the fur has a bioluminescent sort of weird shimmering sparklingness to it as it runs.
Huh.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's... Again,
it's true, Mark.
What's
that?
That?
Years ago, but it's true. What I've just told you, it's true.
It's...
Jack, I'm not keeping anything from you, but I'm a remote viewer, and I remote viewed one in Texas many, many years ago.
Oh, wow.
And what I saw was like the ground in front of me was shimmering, like swirling and shimmering movement, like a portal.
Right.
And then I saw it. I saw what I could only explain was the Dogman.
That's very interesting.
And I was doing that for a woman that had seen on numerous, had reported to me on numerous occasions that she'd seen it. And she asked me to see if I could find it.
Very interesting. He did mention that they had in their possession some kind of alien technology that was allowing them to make jumps between areas. It's also mentioned in her book, so maybe that, what you were seeing was that. I find that just very, very strangely corroborating, you know what I mean? It's fascinating.
That must be 20, 25 years ago.
Wow.
And I'll tell you another thing I've seen, and I want to ask you this as well. I know I'm changing the subject from Dogman, but do you think Owlman and Mothman could be one and the same? Because I've seen something from my landing window when I looked out over the valley one night about 3 o'clock in the morning.
It's possible because the body descriptions are so similar. And I've done a lot of investigating into the Mothman, the original Mothman incident in Point Pleasant. And what you first begin to really hone in on when you look at everything in detail is that Jonathan Keel firmly believed that the Mothman sightings were connected to the UFO activity that was taking place at Point Pleasant. And when you read the Mothman Prophecies, the book, he makes that very clear. The UFO activity was most prominent among all of this other phenomenon that was going on. And here, yet again, I'm looking at a bipedal crypto animal related to or in the same area as a strong ET presence. And so this also fed into my theory that all of these bipedal creatures have to somehow be a genetic construction of the ETs. And each one, who knows, each one is fulfilling some sort of, mechanism for these ETs here on the earth that we're not aware of. But I can tell you that one of the oldest surviving photographs of a man in black was taken by Mary Heyer, who was the woman in charge of the newspaper in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, during that entire area, or that whole, time era that was taking place. And she was harassed by men in black. And one of the witnesses who saw the Mothman was harassed by a man in black. So you're seeing this ET connection to Mothman. You're seeing an ET connection to Dogman. You're seeing an ET connection to Bigfoot. And, we have to ask ourselves, and I ask myself this all the time because it's my favorite quote, and it's what I've based my entire investigative career on. When you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, has to be the truth. And the problem is that when you eliminate the impossibles, like the developing, evolving naturally on this planet, you are left with very few probabilities. And although they seem highly improbable, they are the only ones left that are not impossible.
So says Mr. Spock. Actually, it was Sherlock Holmes, but,
It was Sherlock Holmes, actually,
Yeah.
Mm.
And Doyle.
And this is UFO highway through this valley, isn't it, Mark? It's no wonder I see so many strange things in the valley, across the fields and everything.
Well, you're also, and again, this could have something to do with it. I
live in the sticks.
I don't know what Jack's thoughts are on ley lines, but where your valley is several ley lines crossing close together, and could possibly be an explanation for all the different types of activity. And this is why I think so much of this activity is interrelated. I mean, everybody in the past thinks, well, you have ghosts over here, you have UFOs over here, you have Bigfoot over here, all separate, and they're really not. There's an interconnection there, whether directly or indirectly, with all of this type of high strangeness phenomenon. I was doing a paranormal investigation case here in New Jersey. That this is one of the ones I was talking about earlier, where we realized it wasn't a traditional ghost; it was some type of elemental or natural or spiritual entity on the land. And one morning, my client called me up, almost in a panic. And she says, Mark, I got to tell you something. I saw something last night, but I'm afraid you're going to think I'm crazy. And I'm not going to think you're crazy. Tell me what. It took me like 5 minutes to convince her to tell me, because she was so afraid that she was going to be thought crazy for what she saw. And she finally spit it out that she woke up about 3 a.m. and she looked across the bedroom, and by the dresser, there was like a white misty shape. It formed into a figure. And she said she must have made a noise or something, because it whipped around and looked at her. And in her words, she goes, Mark, I swear to God, it was an effing alien. And it was the classic gray alien, big eyes, whatnot. But yet the case we were dealing with had absolutely nothing to do with aliens, no, or UFOs or anything. And it always stuck with me. It always stuck with me that with what she was dealing with in that area. Maybe it was that section, and I'm learning, and this is something I'm researching here in my own state. There are several hot spots within a few miles of where I live that are hot spots of high strangeness activity. And I'm wondering if her area is like some of these areas that we talk about, like the Uinta Basin or these other, or where Irene's Valley, where different types of activity all kind of come together under one umbrella because of the location.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that fits perfectly with what I have found in my research as well. And like you were saying, this interconnectivity between phenomena, that's, really what led me down the road of developing this whole theory that, I suspected, like you, after many, many years, that paranormal phenomenon as a whole had to be coming from a singular source. It just didn't make any sense that we had that many different sources of all this stuff that doesn't fit within our reality construct. It just didn't to me. And what I discovered was that there wasn't just one source, there were two. And that's what my whole theory is about. Half of all paranormal activity is interaction with what I call a Type 3 society. That's an extremely advanced alien civilization that's been able to basically colonize an entire galaxy. And the other 50% of all paranormal activity comes from interdimensional activity, which I think includes even ghost activity. I think death is you're transformed into another dimension, and what you're seeing there is their ability to kind of transcend dimensions for whatever reason.
Well, Jack, I'll tell you, when Irene was back doing investigations, there was a case that she worked on where she took a photograph in a house, in a bathroom. And I'm telling you right now, it is the strangest photo I have ever seen, and one of the best, what I consider to be proof of some type of interdimensional activity. Irene, do you mind me talking about this? She's eating grapes again.
Muted when I'm eating them. The one we call the time traveler.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
You can say it. You can.
She and another investigator were doing this house.
Which was a female.
Yes.
Two females.
And they were going through the house. They open the door to the bathroom and they take a picture, and in front of them is a mirror. So in the mirror, you could see the flash of the camera and them. But then
the reason we've done that to the mirror, because sometimes you can take a photograph of yourself in the mirror and see something, or pick up some little something else, like an orb or something like that. That's what we were expecting to see, some sort, maybe dust or something flying around. But we didn't expect what we did get. Yeah.
And what they got, and I'm actually sharing it with you right now so that you can take a look at it, is there is another person there, a man that's walking right between them. And this is a tiny, tiny bathroom, okay? And yet you'll see in the photo, and I sent you the original photo and then a close-up of what looks like a man wearing a black helmet and a chin strap, black top, and you see his hand, and he's holding something in his hand, and almost I can't tell if it's the smudge on the mirror or if there's a little emblem on the helmet, but he's definitely wearing a chin strap, and he's walking sideways.
Some people tried to tell me that was a camera he was holding, but the way he's holding it, it's not camera.
It's some kind of device, and he wasn't there. There was no other men there. It was just her and this other female investigator, and yet here's this man wearing what looks like a military type of uniform. He's perfectly solid, absolutely perfectly solid, but he's in a spot where he couldn't physically fit through, walking through the picture.
You can see my friend, who was smaller than me, you can just see the top of her head at the back of us.
Yeah.
Wow. Like a time slip photograph, kind of.
Oh, that. I know. I had one.
It's something.
I had one this afternoon.
Sorry. You had a time slip this afternoon?
I told you, the bomb that went off yesterday in Liverpool. I saw that last week.
Yeah. Yep. Well, strange things happen to you all the time anyway, so.
Yeah, I know.
But again, this is in terms of photographic evidence, this is, in my mind, one of the most incredible photographs I've ever seen, because it just simply cannot be explained. And the photograph, and it wasn't a, what is it when one photograph goes over another? It wasn't like a double exposure.
No. The photograph before it was perfect. The photograph after it was perfect.
Yeah.
And I've still got the chip that was on. And I keep meaning to send it off and get it examined, but never get round to it.
Yep. So it's, again, one of those, again, are we dealing with interdimensionals, alternate realities, time slips, whatever? Have no idea. Really, really intriguing. Kind of gets away from the cryptid thing a bit, but it fits into what we're talking about the interdimensional side of things.
There's nowhere he could have gone, because at the direction he's heading, there was a brick wall at the end of that bathroom.
Yeah. Very strange. Very strange. There's another cryptid, and I'm bringing this up because of J.C. Johnson. When we had him on our show, and this was well over 10 years ago.
Longer than that.
Longer than that. I can't remember the exact date. I'd have to go back and look. But he mentioned investigating a type of cryptid out in the Four Corners area in the desert. And I really wanted to get your take on this, because along with Dogman, this is one of the ones that I struggle with. But he claimed to have had eyewitness testimony and evidence of seeing what we would call centaurs out there in the desert. Does that ring a bell to you, Jack?
Yes, sir. Sorry, I was muted.
That's okay.
Yeah.
You're in a grape.
There you go. I was trying to find a grape. But, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. So for a 1 year, a very strange year, Crypto Four Corners as an organization got more centaur sightings than any other kind of cryptid. And you have to ask yourself, when you're talking a third or fourth witness and none of them know each other and they all seem adamant that that's what they saw, you're just like, what the hell are these people seeing, And it's one of those things, it's one of those phenomenon. Like, is that it's got to be interdimensional. Well, what else could it be? Or something that's assuming, I don't know why you'd want to assume a centaur shape, but it's one of those things you just can't explain.
Well, if you get down to it, a lot of mythology, a lot of mythological creatures, or even myths in general, myths and stories, all have a kernel of truth in them somewhere. And throughout human history, all ancient history and legends and lore talk about animal-human hybrids of some type. You have, centaurs, of course, but you also have Pan, what was he considered? A satyr, goat, half man, half goat. You have all of the Egyptian gods. You have half of the Indian gods, all having, even the Anunnaki and or down in Mexico, and the Mexican Quetzalcoatl, for half the time described as a man, half the time described as a feathered serpent. So there's all this mixture of animal and human physiology. Now, a lot of it could also be that's the only way that they could describe it at the time, because they didn't have any other frame of reference. You know, as the ancient alien people talk about, maybe they're seeing somebody in a spacesuit or whatnot. But then again, here we are with witnesses actually seeing these types of creatures. So it's just, this is where I think where our idea of reality is just completely wrong and very narrow-minded, and there's so much more going on around us that most people just couldn't even conceive of. It's beyond their comprehension.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. Reality is stranger than fiction by far.
As Robin Williams once said, wow, reality, what a concept. So we only got a few minutes left in the show here. What are you currently working on that you could talk about?
Sure. Well, currently I'm in the middle of producing a new investigative video for my YouTube channel, and it explores fully all of the evidence that argues that the JFK assassination occurred because of his request for all of the UFO files and information from the CIA just 10 days prior. And there's a lot of information about that, and I'll be presenting that in my video. So I'm doing a video showing that basically the UFO alien presence cover-up is what ended up in resulting in that assassination. And beyond that, I do my live show every Thursday night, 8 p.m. Central. U.S. time is Paranormal Planet. We explore a different paranormal topic every single week. This last week was the Simpson mystery of them being able to predict the future. That was fun. And if you need to reach me, you can find me at on my website, which is paraintelagency.com. And there's a contact form right at the bottom of the front page there.
Oh, fantastic. And where can people find your books? You have Paranormal Planet, Bigfoot Unleashed, and American Sorcerer. Is that one yours?
Right. Yep, sure is. That was actually written in 2009, and I'm getting ready to publish a 385-page manuscript on the mystery of Rennes le Chateau that I lost over 10 years ago and recently found in a box. I couldn't believe it. So yeah, it was.
You broke up there a little bit. It's based on what?
Manuscript on what?
On the mystery of Rennes le Chateau. So all of the stuff that Dan Brown fictionalized, basically, it deals with an aspect of that I believe talks about the lost tomb of one of the two Anunnaki princes. The lost tomb of Enki is where I believe it leads, and that's what my whole book is about. So
that'd be great.
And so those are available on Amazon right now in paperback and Kindle editions?
They are, both on paperback and Kindle. Bigfoot Unleashed is only on Kindle, and my future books are probably only going to be ebooks. There's a very good reason for that, and that's because I'm a field investigator, and I publish actual field photographs for people as part of the evidence that I'm presenting to them. And you can't get a real feel for that evidence on black and white photographs in a paper book back, paperback book. So with these ebooks, you get full color photographs that you can blow up and take a look at and all of that. And I think that's going to be the way to go in the future. So, but yeah, you can, if you just Google any of those books, they'll pop up for you and you should be able to find them.
Excellent. Well, Jack, thank you very much for coming on the program tonight. This was a lot of fun, and something tells me we could do a whole nother show on this, and of course your new book coming up, because there's so many different cases to talk about. So we'll have to have you back again sometime in the near future.
Absolutely. I would love that for sure.
Okay. Well, thank you again for coming on. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to another edition of the Paranormal UK radio show, the flagship show on the Paranormal UK radio network. We will be back next week with an all brand new show. So we will see everybody then. And Irene, where can people find us?
Everywhere, people, everywhere.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, and we will catch you next time. Have a good night.